Is your experience of drawing ruined by the fear of making mistakes? This is really common. It can even put us off starting a drawing in the first place. Let me give you 8 reasons why we shouldn't worry nearly as much about making mistakes. And let me tell you, these all come from my personal experience. But I'm thinking about them now because in the drawing I did yesterday for a demo video, I made a fundamental mistake. My first reaction was, I ruined it. But that got me thinking about the way my attitude to mistakes has changed. But firstly, by mistake, I mean any line or mark that's not in the place we intended it to be. And we may realize this as soon as we've done it, or as was the case with my mistake yesterday, we might realize it partway through the drawing. The first point is I think it's helpful to realize as we sit down that my nerves about how the drawing's going to be, about making mistakes, will never be as high as right now, as before I've done anything, because, well, it's all ahead of me. And equally, this is a natural place to be in. So I think it's helpful to remind ourselves it will become easier, perhaps not the drawing, but dealing with the nerves. Second point, it's really important to realize and to remind ourselves that mistakes I make at the start of a drawing are going to look worse than any other mistakes I make, because there's going to be an awful lot of blank paper. And because of that, the marks that are in the wrong place are going to be a much larger percentage, maybe 50%, of all the ink that's on the paper. Now, that will change, but I have to get past that moment of, it looks unsalvageable. I need to remind myself it won't look so bad when all the marks that are in the right place are on the paper. However, it's not just that mistakes that we make at the start are going to look worse because of all the blank paper around them. But third point is, it's actually going to be easier to make mistakes at the start. But the good news is that being aware of this, we can actually do a lot of things to really bring down the chance that any of these things will affect our drawing. There are very few skills that we use that we don't warm up first, whether it's a musical instrument or playing football. And we do these warm-ups to get our thinking ready, to get our body ready, and to get that coordination between the two happening. But instead, so often, and particularly when we're beginning, we rush into the drawing, whether it's through enthusiasm or ignorance or impatience, I don't know, but it's not helpful. And neither was that branch helpful. I may need a few minutes to warm up my eye-hand coordination. I may need a few minutes to observe my reference more carefully. I may not have got used to the feel of the pencil or the pen in my hand and just found the right place of balance to hold it, or the right angle to have it at the paper. I may not be sitting in the ideal position to move my hand or my arm or my shoulder in a way that will make my marks flow easily. I may not have turned the paper to the right angle to make easy the sorts of marks I need to make. Personally, I overcome all of these issues by doing what you may have heard me talk about, which is a few minutes of experimenting with marks to create the effects I'm wanting, or just a challenging part or a part of the drawing I think will be challenging. I'm not really doing it as a warm-up. I'm actually doing it to experiment with the marks I think I'll be using to create certain effects. But it serves as a warm-up as well. The other reason we're more likely to make mistakes at the start of our drawing is that we've got less marks on the paper, and so we have less to reference from. We have less to get a sense of where am I on the paper when the pen hits the paper. Because the marks we've already placed on the paper help us to align the pen for the marks we're going to place. And the more marks we have, the easier, the faster, and the more accurate it is to place those marks. So it's always going to be harder and easier to get things not quite right at the start with very few marks to reference from. Fourth reason we shouldn't worry so much about mistakes is that so much of the time, in my experience, almost all the time, the marks can be hidden in some way before we get to the end of the drawing. I can adjust the line. If my perspective angle is only slightly out, I can do another line over the top that's at the right angle that maybe crosses the unhelpful line in the middle, or depending on what form this line is a part of, I might do a line top and bottom, if you like, framing now what becomes a diagonal line between them. So my wrong line simply gets visually lost in between the two more correct ones. I might find that there's some shadow that I can use to come up against my incorrect line or marks and hide them with very close, very dense hatching. I might find that there's another object that I can actually shift in my composition to make this happen more easily without any loss of the compositional feel that I wanted in the first place. Now, with the exception perhaps of correcting a perspective angle that's not quite right, most of these things can't be done right away because we don't really know how exactly we're going to do those things early on. They're second half of the drawing things often. But if I know I'm going to have lots of opportunity later on in the drawing, I can let go of the mistake and not stress about it, or most importantly, let it affect what I'm doing at that point. And if you're finding these helpful, please hit the like button for me. That really helps me out. And can I say, I think the final point, when I get to it, will be the clincher of all of these. So if you don't want to chug through the 8, then just zip to the end and at least hear that one. But number 5 is we shouldn't worry so much about mistakes because they guide us in terms of what we need to work on. We're learning to draw. It's a process. We don't expect, or we shouldn't expect, to start at the end. And sometimes I've simply chosen a subject that's too advanced for my experience. So when I make mistakes, they teach me things, or at least they show me things that I need to learn in a new way, in a different way. So that's why I often refer to mistakes as being our friends, because they help us improve. And the mistake I made yesterday, drawing that veranda around the house, I'm not likely to make again for a very long time, if not ever, because I'm now particularly alert to making sure I don't make that mistake again. Number 6 is probably the easiest, but probably also one of the most difficult things because there's nothing actually to do with it. It's more a mindset. We need to trust that when all the lines, all the marks, all the effects we want to create, the whole composition is on the paper, the mark or the line that seemed so wrong and so ruinous, when it was 40% of all the ink on the paper, you can hardly see, you can hardly notice, because the attention is drawn to other places through the lights and darks and compositions and hatching and all the things I've used since I made that mistake. A lot of the impact mistakes have on us is because of the fear that they cause us to have. A lot of the impact mistakes have on us is actually psychological. It's the fear, it's the discouragement, it's the nervousness that the mistakes create in us. And the only way we will learn to come down from this is to finish our drawings and to experience the fact that it doesn't matter nearly as much at the end. And that was a great reminder for me yesterday when I finished the drawing and realized that probably no one except myself was going to notice. 7th point is a little bit of a different tack to the earlier ones, but that's that when we're worried about the mistakes we're making, and perhaps worrying they mean that we can't draw, that we can't develop the skills, that we don't have the talent, it's very helpful to remind ourselves that not every drawing skill is developed holding a pencil or a pen in our hand. I still believe that for beginners, there are more mistakes being made because observation skills not just haven't been developed to the degree they need to be developed, but there's not an awareness that they even need developing. That the observing we do of things around us, for most of us, for everyday life, is inadequate for drawing. Inadequate because it's not the same. When I draw, I look very intensely at a subject, but I particularly look intensely at key points, the critical points I need to have in my head to be able to put the marks on the paper the way I want, with the accuracy I want, to create the proportions, the angles, the values that I want. I can't draw accurately regardless of how good my drawing techniques are if I haven't seen accurately what I'm wanting now to put on the paper in some way. And because I don't realize observation for drawing is different for observation for everyday life, I'm not working to improve my drawing observation. But if I do, I can work on my observation skills, and I have a playlist on that, and I have no doubt that that will greatly reduce the number of mistakes that so many people are making. And here's the 8th point, the 8th reason why we shouldn't worry so much about making mistakes. And I think this ties them all together, and it's probably the most fundamental one that I think it would be helpful to remember every time we pick up a pen. And that's, mistakes do matter if I'm producing an artwork. If I have a commission and I'm being paid to draw a house in whatever style I normally draw in for someone, and I get something wrong, well, that's a problem because someone's paying me to get it right. If I know that I'm learning to draw, if I know that I'm learning a skill, and perhaps still a relatively new skill for me at that, then I realize that what I'm doing is not producing artworks. So now there's no pressure there. I'm not producing artworks. I don't have the frame ready to put it in, or at least I shouldn't. I'm learning a skill. And when we learn a skill, we practice, we do exercises, and we make mistakes. If I learn the piano, I do piano practice. I don't start doing concert piano performances. And if I'm practicing the piano, I will hit wrong notes with my fingers as I learn the range and complexity of notes that there are to play and how to combine them together. If I'm learning a language, it will be the same thing. I'll do exercises, I'll do practice dialogues, and I'll make mistakes. I'll forget words, I'll use wrong ones, I'll use the wrong grammar. But it's all part of the learning process, and I would never expect not to make mistakes. So why with drawing is there this fear of making mistakes? Possibly it's the fact that unlike most other skills that we learn, at the end of the session, we don't see it all forever and ever. It's gone, the sounds have gone, the performance has gone, the activity has happened. But with drawing, we can still look at all our marks on the paper for the rest of our lives if we want. So perhaps that puts pressure on us. Or perhaps we just really have never thought of our art, of our drawing, as being learning a skill in the same way we learn any skill. And that's put unrealistic pressure on us. That what I'm doing when I start to learn to draw is I'm drawing and producing artworks from that, rather than I'm learning a skill, which takes all the pressure off us. A mistake might mean that an artwork is no longer fit for purpose, but it is part of the everyday experience of learning a skill. And I need to accept that, I need to embrace it, and I need to use it. I need to use it to learn how to cover them up, and I need to use it to learn whatever skills I need to focus on to not keep making them. The more confident we are when we draw, the easier it is to place the lines and the marks the way we're intending to place them the first time. So letting go of the pressure that we put on ourselves is a great way to lift our confidence and to reduce the number of unintentional marks we place in unintentional places. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope this has helped lift the spirits of anyone who's been a little overwhelmed with fear of making mistakes. In the end, remember, we're doing this for fun. We don't have to draw. So let's remember that. But it's also a skill to learn. So let's remember that too. And have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.